got some notes, and what I'd like to do is just give you a brief introduction to water. Then we'll go on to look at what happens when we do actually stir, and then at the end we'll look about the practical applications. And I think by then there'll be loads of questions which I'll be more than happy to answer. So I think I'll be talking about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So hold on to your questions as they arise for the next 20 minutes, if that's okay. So what I'd like to do is just introduce something that we don't really pay much attention to, and that's water. And I think we really take water for granted. I've got a glass here. We turn on the tap and there it is. As gardeners, we moan when it rains and we moan when it doesn't. But do we really consider what water is to this planet and to us? So just a few things to maybe spark just your ruminations and considerations about water. So 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. So we're a water planet, really, not an Earth planet. When it rains, it's life-giving, isn't it? It brings life to everything. But have you ever noticed about the shape that raindrops make? They're making a sphere. And this is a kind of universal forming shape that water takes. So even if you look at a large body of water, it coalesces into this unity. We have clouds. We are actually, the Earth is surrounded by a mantle of water, moisture-laden atmosphere. And if we didn't have that moisture-laden atmosphere, all of life on Earth would die instantly. It is so essential to maintaining life. We have rivers, streams, and springs. And with those, it's always easy to get this sense of water always being in movement and flow. So a river's easy to see, and I was looking yesterday evening, I went to walk down my local river, the Derwent, and it's not particularly high, but it's still doing all of this wonderful movement, and that's not just on the surface, that's through the whole body of this unity of water. And it's even the springs are moving up, and you've got whirlpools moving down. It's just this constant movement. Water is always in movement. We've got the oceans and seas. So, like I say, the kind of holding together of water is just like another, but much bigger raindrop. But it's actually abiding by the law of minimal surface. It pulls together into a certain shape. And then we've got, in the seas and oceans, we have the waves, which are rhythm in form. Very easy to understand how water connects with rhythm. And then we have something like a still lake. And you think, well, where's the movement in that? But there's this constant evaporation, condensing, circulating movement within the whole body of the water. So it's still in movement. So that's one picture of water on the planet, or I don't know if we should call it planet Earth, planet water, perhaps would be better. And then if we think about living organisms, so water is in everything. It's in plants, it's in animals, and it's in us. So water isn't just something out there, it's in us. And 60% of the human adult body is actually water. And our hearts and brains are 70% water. And our lungs are 80% water. So we're water beings as well. We're on a water planet, or planet water, and we are water. And this whole, just because it's in us, it doesn't mean to say it's still. There's all this movement. And the world of water is one of constant motion, of forming and dissolving, of process. And then if you consider as well the different states of water, so we have vapor, we have the liquid, and we have the solid, which is ice or snow. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit further on, but one of the most amazing newer discoveries is that there is a fourth phase or state of water, which is between the solid and the liquid, and it's colloidal. And I'll give you a bit more information about that. But for me, that's one of the keys to understanding why we do what we do with stirring. The other aspect of water, which if you consider where water meets matter, what does it do? It actually forms shapes. So water's forming forces create rivers, creates erosion of the land, so it actually shapes the land, creates sand patterns, and it actually creates perhaps things that we're not taught at school. So a lot of the shaping of nature is reflected as a water form, particularly leaves, which again I'll come on to in a bit. So this sense of movement and flow, of process, it doesn't really measure up to just being described as H2O for me. And that's what science says, it's just H2O, hydrogen, 2 molecules of hydrogen, 1 of oxygen, job done. And physics hasn't really explored much more beyond that. That's sufficient, that's the chemical explanation, and which is why this fourth phase of water is so interesting as a development. I think one of the other aspects of water is its ephemeral nature, so it's a master of concealment. If you think of the way clouds move, they're water, but they're 1 minute they're there, next minute they're gone, and you get reflections, 1 minute they're there. So this whole picture of movement, process, water is something that really defies conventional scientific analysis. And I think one of the ways to try and understand and get more into the feel of water is almost parking our analytical heads. I mean, we have this tendency as humans to want to fix something, you know, this is what it is, and job done, tick it onto the next thing, and we form a fixed picture. But if we're trying to get to know something as fluid and as changeable as water, it's almost like we need to transform our own thinking and cultivate a fluid imagination almost, to think in terms of flow and process, which I think as gardeners we kind of do anyway. We have an insight into metamorphosis and growth that kind of is one of the joys, really. So I think we can only really begin to truly comprehend and understand water and the processes in water and what water inspires in nature or creates when our own thinking becomes more fluid and less rigid. So that's just a kind of a teaser in there to encourage you to just not reduce it to this H2O business. So there's another, which for me was a revelation when I suddenly realized, well, water actually has no biological life of its own. So it doesn't have an expression of life in itself. It doesn't have growth. It doesn't reproduce. It's got no metabolism. But without water, there is no life. So it's this giving. There's a selflessness about water. It enables life, because without it, there's nothing, but it has no life of its own, which I think, again, is another insight into why it's quite such extraordinary. It's whatever it is extraordinary. I don't know if it's a thing, a being. And if we continue, yeah, it's that idea that it's part of a kind of process of metamorphosis. So metamorphosis to me is something growing and changing. And in a plant, the organ of the plant that changes and grows most visibly in the life of a plant is the leaf. And leaves in our biodynamic system have a link with water. So if we take this kind of trying to be picture thinking, fluid picture thinking, it's actually not so difficult to consider that the elemental beings are influencing and helping the growth of the leaves and the plants. So I just went out in the garden just before we started and picked up some leaves. So I don't know if anybody's ever studied metamorphosis. It's fascinating, and there's quite a lot of interesting stuff that's Margaret Colquhoun did a lovely book called New Eyes for Plants, and she does leaf sequences, and it shows the development of a leaf from the seed leaves and the low down leaves, which are near the earth and the water. And as the plant gets higher and higher, the leaves change, something happens to them. So the water shape is this. So this is a water lily leaf, round, not differentiated. This is quite a typical leaf for water plants. There's another one here, marsh marigold. But when you get different sorts of leaves, and I'm not going to labour this point, but what's going on there? What's come into that round shape that's water, and it's changed, cut into that watery shape, roundness, that spherical raindrop shape. And this could be air that's coming in, just as a little picture thinking idea, yeah? So that is just a kind of an idea that these undines might be actually having a part to play in this water processing, changing, moving, and that they're kind of, the chemistry of the plant is in the leaves, the photosynthesis, and it's water meeting sunlight that creates the food. So the undines you could call the chemists, the plant's chemists, possibly, as an idea. So I've kind of started with that just to kind of position water as not just this stuff that comes out the tap and out the sky. I think there's something quite extraordinary about water. However, we're here to talk about the stirring. So I thought we'd take a closer look. For those who are new to stirring, I'll just run through the process. Then hopefully Jess is going to show us the videos that we've got of the close-up of the process. And then we can talk about the practicalities. But what we do in biodynamics is we take a certain substance. It might be horn manure, it might be horn silica, it could be valerian juice, which is one of the compost preps, or it could be equisetum. And we take a small amount of that substance and we stir it in water. And the shape we stir into this life-giving substance is a vortex. So what's going on with the vortex? What's that all about? And I think, again, a vortex is not just a whirlpool, it's a universal shape that happens in nature everywhere, from the Milky Way and the planetary movements right down to, I've got a little shell here. There's a vortex inside this shell. So the vortex is one of nature's and water's natural forming forces, like the sphere, this raindrop shape. So a vortex is a natural shape that occurs with water. And it's also a rhythmic shape. The planets and planetary movements are rhythmic, and within nature it's about rhythm and movement and process. Fibonacci numbers, exactly, Melissa. Fibonacci sequence creates a spiral, and it's the vortex of the idea you have a still point in the middle and it moves to the periphery. And this point and periphery is again a picture in biodynamics. So it could be time to take a look, Jess, Tech Queen, at the videos, and I'm hoping I'll be able to talk over them. They're videos that if I were doing this person to person, I'd have demonstrations and ink and all sorts, but it could get messy in front of the computer. So it's much easier to talk through some videos, and they're videos I did in my kitchen with my son. So, but this kind of sequence showing a vortex and showing what is actually happening when we stir, and how that it might give us a clue as to what the benefit is. Are we ready to roll?
Okay, I'm just going to share screen.
Ooh, it's exciting and slightly nerve-wracking.
It is. Okay, are we all seeing a nice vortex?
Yeah, let that one roll.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is just a slow motion of a vortex being created with a stick in a glass vase, just a flower vase. And it's, for me, it's showing how the vortex continues. Basically, you get it into motion and it continues. And again, we look at the surface of things, but we forget it's actually going on in the whole body of the water. Oh, we've got ink in this one. Okay, so this is out of sequence, but it doesn't matter. So this ink has been added to show the way that water organizes itself, and it's laminar. So it's layers and layers and layers. And when you stir a vortex, you create lots and lots of edges. And so you can see here, there's no stirring going on, but there's a pulse. So the actual ink pulls itself down and up. So it's almost like it's got its own breathing rhythm as well. So I'm hoping there are going to be 2 or 3 other videos as well. This one is a slow-mo one. I think there's some others. But can you see that the like veils? That's the kind of structure that's created. All I've added is just normal blue quick ink. Yeah, do it with your kids. You'll never stir a cup of tea in the same way either, I tell you. But it's mesmerizing to watch. And again, this, I won't talk while the video's on about this 4th phase of water, but it's to do with what happens at the edges. And edges is where the magic happens. And that's where substance meets the water and is integrated into the water. You can still see the pulse happening. I haven't stirred, you know, it's not been stirred for a little while, but the pulse is still there. And what as well, when you start to look at a vortex, you're stirring the whole body of the water, and it has this spiraling movement around the edges as well. So it slows down at the edges and gets faster in the middle, but it's moving the whole body as well. This toroidal shape, if anyone's heard of the torus shape. So we'll see if another video automatically comes. What do you think, Jess? What's going to happen?
That's all I've got from you. That was pretty amazing. I was really...
Okay, so you haven't got the 3 that
I've just got the 1. Apologies
okay.
for that, but that's...
No worries, that's fine. It's that's the best one to show. So Terry's asking what kind of ink. It was just normal Quink ink, you know, just the little blue bottle. You can just, it's so easy to do. So what I have actually got, and I'm hoping you'll be able to see this. Can you see if I hold that? So before we kind of were going to be looking at the one with the blue ink, if you have a go at this at home, what we do when we're stirring biodynamically is we make a vortex, but then we go into reverse. And what we do, we create a chaos. And when we have that chaos, we create lots of extra bubbles. And bubbles are more surface. So what we're doing with the stirring for biodynamics is making so much surface area that the substance that we're adding gets completely, becomes part of the water. It couldn't be more part of it. And when you have the little bubbles that come when you go into reverse and stir in the opposite direction, when each of those pops, that creates another vortex as well. So the whole water body becomes completely impregnated with the substance that you're stirring into it. And I've mentioned a bit about this 4th phase of water. So there's a chap called Dr. Gerald Pollock, and I'm going to give Jess all these names, and I've got a few other books and things to recommend. But Gerald Pollock, he's a professor of bioengineering, and he's done some brilliant TED Talks, and he talks about structured water. And this is this 4th phase of water. And what happens what they've discovered is when water meets organic substance, the very edge of the water, when it meets the organic substance, changes in nature, and that's the bit that becomes colloidal. So this idea of the active edge is now scientifically proven. There's also all sorts of stuff goes on with positive and negative charge, and it's absolutely fascinating. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not even going to try and explain it. But for me, it kind of clarifies why we do what we do, why we bother. What we're doing is we're bringing substances to life, because that's what water does. We've got water and oxygen. We're also bringing substances into a rhythmic, structured form. And then what we create then informs where we put it. So whether it's on the ground or whether it's over the plants, it's so purposeful. It's not just random. And then the other element that we bring in as biodynamic gardeners is ourselves. So we are part of the stirring. And I think one of the reasons that Steiner suggested we do it for a whole hour is because it demands something of us. Will, to actually sit still and do it, but also it forces and focuses attention. So we have to sit still and be in our gardens, and we have to pay attention. And if you've ever done a stir, we can have a conversation when I've done my piece, it puts you into quite a meditative state if you're open to that, and it draws you in. There's a profound, well, for me, when I was doing stirring on my own, I would have a profound shift in my consciousness as well. So when I was head gardener at Weleda, I would never let anybody do a stir if they were angry, mentally disturbed, because I think all of that goes into this water as well. And those effects are then spread on your garden. Why would you want to do that if it's not all done with a positive frame, positive mindset, love? And I think this is the gift that the stirs give us. We think they're a bit of a chore. We might think they're a bit of a chore because it's a whole hour, but actually they are a gift. And then we give that gift to the land as well. So, I think, well, we've got 8 o'clock. I'll just see. Yeah, I think what I'll just talk about now is just the practicals, and then we'll open it up for question and discussion, if that's okay. So we started talking about water. This is why it's important to try and get the best water you can to do your stirs with. So the ideal water is rainwater. So it's living water in a natural state. And if you can collect rainwater in your garden and ideally have it covered up so it doesn't develop any algal growth, that's the best water. If you can't store rainwater for whatever reason, then get water from your pond and filter it with a bit of cloth. And if you can't do that, then tap water. But what you're best doing is running off a bucket of water and then leaving it for 2 or 3 days in the sunlight, and all of the chemicals that are used to treat our water to kill everything will off gas, and the water might attract a little bit more life in those 2 or 3 days. So the best is rainwater, then pond, or yeah, something like that. And then if you have to, you have to. It's like needs must. It's really interesting working at Weleda, because in the garden we want rainwater and the most alive water, and in our production area they want the deadest water they can, because they don't want any microbes in it. So we have 2 conflicting ideas of water quality in one company. But yeah, we can't have products with microbes growing in. So they like dead water. We like alive water. Jane, you're on mute, yeah.
Spring water. I've got a spring in the forest.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically how alive is your water in its natural. I'm not lucky enough to have a spring on my garden, but yeah, perfect.
Not in my garden. No, I wish it was. Yeah.
But it's worth making the effort to get some good quality water to start with. That's your kind of main thing. Then the next thing is heating your water, ideally up to body temperature. And my understanding is that when water is heated up to body temperature, it's more receptive to life, and to also receiving and assimilating the substances you're putting into the water and mixing in. And water, also warm water, somehow moves easier and also changes after 20 minutes stirring, 15 minutes. The texture in the water also changes, and I think there's a difference if it's warm as well. But the challenge is sometimes for the gardener, what you really want to avoid is water heated with electricity, because that's going to be doing something to the nature of the water. So again, the perfect one is to heat your water on a wood fire. Next level down is a gas ring, because it's at least a flame. And then I know people have heated kettles up and poured it into the water body to warm it up. I think if I was going to do that, I would probably try and heat it on the hob or something and add that to the main body of water. But I think I would rather leave it in the greenhouse for a couple of days rather than introduce electricity, you know, I think might be better. So the next thing is what vessel. And again, a lot of, the purists would say, well, it's got to be copper. How else could it be? You know, because copper is conductive and we're doing something with positive and negative charging in the water. So the ultimate is a copper vessel. And I have seen old copper water tanks cut down. So that is an option, and with little stands to sit it on. But we never got that far at Weleda. So what we have at Weleda is we have a couple of stainless steel vessels which were used in production, and they're quite inert metals. So they're pretty good and they don't rust. But we also have a lovely wooden bucket, like a large stirring vessel, which is lovely. And I think a barrel, probably a bit big for the average garden, that's the challenge. So ideally, yeah, copper, then probably wooden, or we had commissioned a potter to make a beautiful clay vessel. And it's gorgeous, it's got lovely handles, beautiful, and it's perfect for garden size. And it only cost us, well, it was a few years ago, but it only charged about 60 quid, and it's just a joy, and it sings, the sound of it's beautiful. Sounds like a stream. However, if you have none of those, a bucket will do, and a plastic bucket. Linda will pull her hair out of this one. But actually, if that's all you've got, get a bucket, make sure it's clean, and stir in a bucket. And whatever vessel you use, the best thing to do is to fill it 2/3 full. There is a kind of this proportion called the golden mean, which is 2/3 is supposed to be optimum. But you have to have quite a high, narrow vessel. But basically, don't overfill your bucket because you'll just waste it when you stir it. And then, yeah, and then the last thing I've got, oh yeah, wooden stick. So I use just some either twigs, willow twigs. If you've got a large volume, you can make like a besom broom and just experiment, see what works best for you. But you can use it with, just put your hand in. And Patricia, who's right in the middle of my screen, who we've done many stirs with, she always prefers to stir by hand, and it's just as effective. And you're really, really intimately connected with what you're doing. What's this? Joanne is saying, I've heard clay unglazed vessels. Yeah, clay is fine. Yeah, I think probably glazed might be better. The unglazed is good for stirring the preps, but I think you'd be better with the glaze for the water stirring. And then, yeah, the last thing I've got on my list of things that you need to bring along is a good mental attitude. So that's it, really. That's my kind of little presentation. So I'm really happy to take questions. And I can see, if Linda and Jess are okay, I can see, I think, most people. So Jane's got her hand up again.
Yeah.
Well, you've answered my question about whether it matters if it's porous by saying that the glazed pot would be better.
Mm-hmm.
Presumably it needs to be round. Yes,
that's quite important because you are actually stirring into a vortex. Yeah. It would be incredibly challenging to stir in a square thing. And I think that the business of the porous thing is, you know, you've got to remember you're cleaning in you've got to be hygienic. You know, if you're stirring horn manure one day and horn silica, you want to be able to clean it, and a glaze will make sure it stays clean.
Yeah. Presumably a curved base would be better than a flat base then?
That's what the purists with their copper thing, it's a curved base, curved bottom, but I've never used one like that. It's absolutely fine to use a flat thing. And
last question, you didn't mention glass or plastic.
So plastic bucket you can use. Glass, I've never thought it would be particularly practical on a garden situation with Weleda, because we have lots of people through. If you can be careful and not, yeah, it's inert, it's perfect if you can look after it. Not end up with a disaster.
Somewhere I have a vase that my mum gave me, which is fluted at the top and curved at the bottom and about 2 foot high and about a foot wide somewhere.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds great. Lovely, thank you. Suella, you've got...
Yes, please, miss, please. Claire, could you explain what elemental beings are for those of us who don't go down the pub with them? And then secondly, I am the ultimate repurposer. Firstly, how can we ever follow that, Claire? It was fantastic. Thank you. I will never, ever look at water in the same way again, I promise you. But I am already, because I'm moving, folks, and I am determined to get my new garden and start stirring. Now, I have got a magnificent, really heavy old bread crock. And then when you think, I mean, Habitat used to sell them. If you want a big clay pot, a bread crock is probably most people's best bet, because you can go and buy them and they will not cost you a fortune.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So what are these things called?
So elemental beings. So I flippantly talk about them. So we have kind of folk stories about the wee little people and the fairies, but there is a kind of a little less whimsical idea about them. Steiner talked or wrote a lot about it, and lots of other people. One of the best books to read is Susan Raven's Communicating, or Nature Spirits, the Remembrance. But basically, if we think of the physical world as being made up of the elements, then the elemental beings are the beings that animate the physical world and bring it into motion. So this idea of water being perpetually moving, it takes this picture imagination to consider that actually that might be being encouraged and supported by the interaction of beings, but they're not of this world. They're the intangible inhabitants of this planet. So they're not on this physical plane, they are on the next one, the etheric.
Okay. Or if you wanted a slightly more straightforward or scientific explanation, is it maybe that the way that information is imparted, so to speak, if we think of it as energy and imparting? Yeah,
it's interesting. The book I mentioned by Susan Raven, her book is all about trying to marry current scientific thinking with the language of the elemental beings. And I think that, because I'm not a scientist, so I like the idea. I'm an artist, so I'm quite happy with undines and salamanders. And, but yes, her book really helps to, or tries to marry the language of modern science, and particularly quantum is finding the right pathways to explain these influences that are in the material world.
That's great. Believe it or not, I never knew that basically they're the companion, if you like, of the physical elements.
Yeah.
It never
is the name elemental beings.
Yeah, I know, but if you don't know what they are,
you wouldn't know. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. We've got a question from Susanna Baker. How big a pot would the average garden need for stirring? Thank you. I'm a practical person as well. And what kind of volume would you stir each time? And how often would you prepare the water in this way?
Oh, wow.
Only another hour's worth.
I'm a great fan of the bucket measure. So a good bucket, an average bucket, is good for the average garden.
Yeah, that's great.
It would give you plenty. If you were doing home manure, that would give you more than enough to get a brush and scatter around. I mean, we're not really here to discuss the preparations per se, but I think a bucket is great for home manure. Horn silica, you don't need so much generally because you spray it as a fine spray. So a vase would actually probably work. I remember seeing pictures of in Maria Tunn's calendar of somebody holding a vase like that under their arm. So it doesn't have to be something on the ground. It can be something you can sit and stir if you just need a small quantity. And if you just needed to make something for your greenhouse plants, if you were doing home manure, again, just make a smaller quantity. With experience, you'll get to understand a bit more how much you need, and always go a little bit over generous with your water so that you don't run out when you're applying it. Okay, Suella has her hand up. Yeah.
The comment I wanted to make was at Christmas time, post-Christmas, doing Three Kings stirring at Hungary Lane, we sang.
Yes. Yeah,
and that I've not seen that done for other preps, but only it worked very nicely at Three Kings. It's
funny, the Three Kings tends to be, I don't know if people know about this one. This is, it wasn't suggested by Rudolf Steiner. It came from somebody after Steiner who, he was very affected by Hiroshima and sensed in himself the effect it had on the elemental world, this intangible world. So he created this Three Kings preparation as a gift for the intangible beings. Of gold, frankincense and myrrh, and it has a celebratory gift sense to it, which is why I think the singing perhaps seems more appropriate. Although if I was doing a home manure, I used to sing or hum. It's whatever you feel like doing. Yeah, put anything good and lovely into it.
Thank you.
If I may, Claire, clearly elemental beings, I'm not the only one that has got excited about the elemental beings. So Karen is saying, are we talking energy with the beings, and how can one connect with elemental beings? Are they more present when stirring and being grateful? And as a little extra, how the hell am I going to get them out of my septic tank that I am inheriting? Because apparently I've got some and they ain't very happy.
Ah, interesting. So, what was the first question?
The first is, yes, sorry, Claire. Are we talking energy with the beings, and how can one connect with the elemental beings? Are they more present?
Okay, so I once talked to somebody who was clairvoyant and could see these beings. I only ever get a sense in the back of my neck. I've never really seen or had a direct experience, but she said that when she stirred, all of the elemental beings leaned in and kind of moved in closer and closer because they were really curious and drawn to the preparation stirring. So from that, and she was a very credible writer, and she wasn't whimsical, she was very practical. My sense is that yes, they know it's good and they like and appreciate the attention that we're giving. But my understanding as well is, even just as a human walking through your garden with love and appreciation is a gift for the elemental world.
Yeah,
I think that kind of explains a bit about green fingers. It's a two-way dialogue.
Yeah,
and maybe elemental beings is a kind of another conversation another time. I mean, if there's interest, and I think, you know, it would be interesting to get maybe Susan Raven or someone along who is a bit more of an expert. I only have my own personal stuff really on this.
That would be great, Claire. Right, we're back to more prosaic stuff now. Jess, I figure you and Claire are doing a great job on the hand waving thing. So
There's no hands at the moment.
Right. So back to the practical. I've heard, this is from Terry, I've heard it's not a good idea to use whiskey barrels that have been burnt inside for stirring. What do you feel about this, Claire? And how would the burnt inside affect the water preps? Because Terry's got 5. But it's disgusting to use, the poor chap.
I would think untreated wood is better. So yeah, I think it's probably best to avoid anything that's really had a lot of alcohol in it as well. I don't know, or something that has been scrubbed really clean. And yeah, I don't have any experience. I just know our stirring vessel that was wood is large, which has a good relationship to water.
Okay,
But yeah, I don't really know.
More practical from Sean Cameron here. Is there a particular time of day for the best results?
There is for the 2 of the field sprays, the horn manure and the horn silica. So horn manure works very much with the earth and the water elements, and that's always recommended to be stirred and sprayed in the afternoon, late afternoon, early evening. And then the kind of opposite, the counterbalance to that is the horn silica, which works with the light and the air and the warmth, and that's an early morning spray. So you're kind of working with different parts of the plant. The horn silica works more with the fruit and the flower and the ripening processes, and the horn manure works more with the root development and the leaf, the vegetative growth, the connection with earth. So you're doing you're kind of working with this balance, what is it, plant between heaven and earth, and the kind of biodynamics supports both opposites, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So yeah, morning horn silica, afternoon horn manure.
What about something like horsetail, and when you make the teas?
Yeah, I don't think that has the same. They're kind of more independent. I think they're more tools to aid the plant in whichever direction you want to take them. So I've never really heard of anything being specific about those. Yeah. Same with putting the compost preps in. You just do them when you've made your compost heap. Yeah.
What about the barrel prep? Christ, I even sound like I know what I'm talking about now. I don't, but I do remember. Oh, that'd never do, would it? Because I remember talking to a biodynamic farmer about this, and he's really keen on the barrel prep and spraying with the barrel prep as a kind of almost universal good idea to use on your garden. Would you use the barrel prep, and would you explain to people what the barrel prep is, Claire, at any particular time of the garden?
Yeah, that would be again an afternoon. It's working with the soil, working specifically with the decomposition processes in the soil and assimilation of things like leaf litter, plant matter. So it's like a digestive aid for the soil. Okay. And it's made from manure and basalt and eggshells and prepared in a certain way that it actually has the compost preparations put into it. So by using it, you're actually putting the compost preparations all over your garden. It is a really good one to use just everywhere. And the bonus is you only need to stir it 20 minutes. So it's more about soil in its own being, rather than the horn manure is more about plant and soil connectivity, I think.
Oh, okay. Right, I've got one from Dylan here. How detailed should I be when spraying horn manure? Should I be trying to get a consistent cover everywhere, or is it okay to be a bit more relaxed about it and scatter it about?
So my understanding, and I'm not a scientist and I've not done tests, but I understand that each droplet has a radiant effect of 3-4 feet, maybe even more. So you're certainly not trying to cover every square centimetre of soil. You want large droplets that will connect with the soil. This is why it's best done on damp conditions, because then it joins in with the soil organisms without too much trouble, but certainly has a radiant effect. You're aiming to get it on the soil in large droplets. And the horn silica is the opposite. That's a fine spray above the plants. So.
And presumably that's why the brush is a really good implement.
Yeah, it's ideal because a good stiff bristle brush, and you just flick it everywhere and you walk at a pace, and you certainly don't have to kind of dot it around every bit of plant. It's a kind of kickstart for the soil organisms. I think that's another thing I didn't actually mention as part of this talk, but when you stir the horn manure, a whole hour is the optimum time for the optimum growth of all the microbes that are actually in the horn manure, and the body temperature water actually creates the perfect environment for this mass growth. And you know, one of the joys of this pandemic is that it finally shows people that really small organisms can have a massive effect.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we need to be more mindful and pay more attention to the positive ones, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because unfortunately, for the last 50, 60 years, we've been conditioned to think that anything bacterial or micro is bad, and we've got to get a spray out on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's have a look. I've got another one here. Yes. Also, it's all this kind of basic practical stuff. Thank you for raising it, everybody. So from Melissa, how soon should you spray after making the prep? And let's add another one. How long will it last for?
Okay, so my understanding is, well, I've heard some people say don't use it after 4 hours, but I would use it straight away. I would really try not to leave it hanging around. Just spray it and stir it and spray it as part of the same process, because it's also to do with what's happened to you while you've been stirring it. That sense goes into the garden as well. I've just seen Patricia's got her hand up. I don't know how long you've had your hand up for. Sorry, it's been
a bit.
Oh, Patricia, sorry.
Really, now horn preparation, ideally we want to get it onto the soil, don't we, Claire?
Yeah.
But I think with a lot of us who've got small gardens, I think these days, you know, the idea is that we'll keep our ground well covered because, you know, we've not got erosion and it's better for things.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, being prosaic, that if you haven't got bare soil, you just do your best you can, you know, in your well covered garden.
And absolutely. And when we stir and spray for Weleda, we've actually got a huge amount of grassland, and we would still cover the grassland. So yeah, it's not just bare soil. I mean, it tends to be something, if you're thinking about planting, you've planted up your bed of cabbages, you've disturbed the soil, so the horn manure would actually help the soil get back into order. But yeah, garden everywhere. And if you get some on your leaves and on your grass, it's going to do nothing but good. You can't really go wrong with horn manure at all.
Yeah, Priscilla, that is a great question, because I have a garden. There is not a square inch of soil in my garden, and it really likes being like that, and I am never about to ever have another square inch of soil in any garden I have. So that's really nice to know that I can use the horn manure and it will still do it all good. Thank you.
Yeah, it'll find its way down to the soil.
Yeah.
I just saw a question pop up in chat about somebody didn't understand the stirring for an hour. Is that
Kerry? Yeah.
Is that Kerry? Do you want to shout up and say what is it you didn't understand? Which bit?
Yeah, you just said about it's about optimum for microbial growth.
Yes, so this is
why is that important? I don't understand.
Okay, so the reason we work with the horn manure is it's in its natural state from the cow. It's the perfect microbial match for the soil organisms. That's why cow manure is the best manure. It's got a similar microbial load. When we process it and make horn manure, we amplify that microbial life. And I have actually talked to a soil scientist who's done tests, and he said after you dig up the horn from after the winter time, the microbial life is increased. So what you're then doing by stirring it into water for an hour in warmed water, you're increasing it again. So what you're, as a kind of something that the soil organisms need, they need as many different microbes of the right sort to promote life and to promote the connection between the plant and the root, the root and the soil and the mycorrhizal life. The more microbes that are actually in the preparation, the better it is. It's kind of like, you know, when we eat the right yogurt for our gut health, it's kind of like that. The whole manure is the right microbial load for healthy living soil. So it's like an inoculant. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, Terry, there's just been some new research by one of the prep makers in Italy. He's a most amazing guy. And they've actually now catalogued the huge variety of different microorganisms which are in the horn manure. And I did go over to the Gertianum, that they call it, and I saw this guy, and it's my favorite story about biodynamics, if everyone can bear with me, because I walked into the workshop on the preps and there was this wonderful glass jar full of water with this tiny little, with a kind of little round brown ball in it. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And the interesting thing was, because I knew the brown ball looked like soil, but it wasn't dispersing in the water. And it didn't disperse in the water. And 2 hours later, it still hadn't dispersed in the water. And then I went back the next day and the water was still clear. And I think it was at that moment that I kind of had a light bulb moment. And the reason is because the horn manure, it's not just the microorganisms, but it is so stacked full of humus. It's so colloidal that actually it doesn't disperse. All of us could go out into our garden, dig up a bit of soil, stick it in some water, and immediately you get a cloud. And the horn manure stayed its own man or woman, or elemental being, or whatever you want to call it. But it stayed that way for 3 days. And at that point, I figured it must be pretty special. So I hope you don't mind my sharing that with you. But there is a lot going on in that horn manure prep, that's for sure.
So one thing I thought I could do is just share a few recommended reads. I don't know if any of you were joined us for the Implementations Copper Tool workshop that Jane did, but she was talking about Victor Schauberger, and there was a book which I believe is still in print called Hidden Nature, and his work on working with the water forces and the forming force of water is a really lovely book. Another book which I believe, this is an old copy, this is Sensitive Chaos by Theodore Schwenk, and I will write these down for Jess if she doesn't catch them. This is an excellent book, again, talks about the forming forces and patterns in nature that are in us and in the planet, and just a fabulous book. And then this one is my actual favourite because it's got even more pictures and it doesn't overcomplicate things. This is called Understanding Water. It's published by Floris Books. And it just, again, lots of pictures about all the different forming forces of nature, of water. The vortex is one, the droplet is one, but there are several others as well. And for those of you who are interested in flow forms, which are these sculptural forms that you can actually energize water, they're not really suitable for prep stirring, but they are great for at the end of reed beds and where you're cleaning grey water. You have these flow forms and they oxygenate and aerate water. So there's a book called Flow Forms, The Rhythmic Power of Water by John Wilkes. That's an interesting read. He was very into properties of water. And then this guy, Dr. Gerald Pollock. So he talks about the fourth phase of water. or structured water, or he calls it easy water because it's called exclusion zone water. And I can highly recommend his TED talk. But he's also got a website, and there's a book that he's done which apparently is incredibly readable. But he's more kind of coming at it from the science rather than this idea of undines and picture thinking. But it's great that the science has actually finally caught up with Steiner's ideas. It makes life a bit easier to talk about stuff.
That sounds like a bit of a natural full stop to me.
I think so.
Yeah, has anybody got any more questions at all? Oh, Rachel wants to know who a TED Talk is. Okay, Rachel, go and Google TED Talk.
No, she wanted to know
Who's TED Talk?
Oh, well, who's TED Talk? Sorry,
The guy was Dr. Gerald Pollock, Pollack.
And just to reassure everybody, I'll put all these references round for you, so don't worry if you're missing them. I will email everybody and it'll all be in there. Okay.
What is the Biodynamic GG, Melissa? Do the workshops go out to the Biodynamic GG? Don't know what Biodynamic.
Sorry, it should be BC. Oh no, gardening group. Sorry.
Oh yeah, of
gardening
course.
club.
Oh. Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah. So
they're for you. Yeah.
Oh well, I missed the work.
Everybody.
How do you get in touch with those?
How do we? Pardon?
Well, how do I find out about the workshops?
The events. We're getting it talking at cross purposes.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
We've got gardening club events coming up, and we do the webinars. I'm not sure.
Were you meaning my workshops, the gardening?
I don't know any of the names.
Desperate for workshops.
Yeah, just wondered how you find out about them. That's all.
I think because there's not been much going on this last year of those kind of activities. I mean, sometimes at Weleda we'll do workshops. I haven't done any for a while, but yeah, I think it's just a case of keeping an eye on the Biodynamic Gardening Club website.
Okay.
Hopefully we can start doing some more face-to-face stuff.
Jess does do her amazing weekly email now called Garden Matters, and if you read that, she always highlights the events and these webinars and anything else we're doing. Yeah. Jess, do you want to rattle through the events? Why not, while we're at it? And
yeah, just very quickly, and just thank you, Claire. It's been a fascinating evening. And I can also see that I think we're going to need some more webinars of this style on each preparation, perhaps, and things like that. But just very quickly, we've got some fantastic Islamic Club members events coming up, which are open to everybody and your friends and family too. We've got 6th of June, which is a Sunday. We're going back to Charles Dowding and going to spend a fascinating afternoon with him, learning about no dig and lots of other good things. 10th of July, we're at Waltham Place, Vitality in the Kitchen and the Garden, with Andre Tranquillini and Daphne Lambert, our living nutrition guru. And that will be a fascinating day. That's a whole day. And then the 15th of August, we're going off to a vineyard near Bristol and learn all about biodynamic winemaking, including a tasting, and looking at possibilities of including vines and things in your garden. So hopefully that's all on our website, or you can ask me questions, or I might even plug it on the email I send afterwards to you.
Patricia, did you have a question?
Well, really, it was just something to share. I think Claire mentioned earlier on that when we've done the stirrings at Weleda, I don't use the stick. I always put my arm in the. We've got a wonderful large vessel that we stir in, and I always put my arm in. And the same, if I do my stirring at home in my bucket, I always just use my hand. Now, what I find for that is you really do seem to get drawn into it. Because you stir with your hand and then you lift your hand up while the vortex is forming, and you let the droplets off your fingers drop back into the middle of the vortex. You take your time and then you create the chaos and go the other way. And one thing I've noticed is that by the end, well onto it, the heat of the temperature of the water increases. Now, if you've got your hand in, you can feel that. You can feel the water gets warmer as you stir. How strange is that? I assume it's the energy created by the vortex. And also the quality of the water changes dramatically. It feels like silk. It felt like water to start off with, and it then feels like silk. So all I would say is, I know normally, you know, people say about using a stick. Do have a go with doing it with your arm and see if you notice these differences.
Yeah.
I think you will. And your intention is so fully into it because your arm's in there as well. You know, you really do become part of your intention and you love going into it. And I just think it improves, you know, when you start to spray it around your garden. So do try it. I can recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you. That is about as good an advert as we would ever wish for, is it?
Jane's got her hand
Jane,
up.
we've got one more question from Jane, and then I think we're overrunning slightly, but it is so fascinating. So go on, go for it, Jane.
Okay, it's just a quick one. If you had a stick, it would be going right down to the bottom of your container. Do you need to put your arm in so that your finger's sort of just off the bottom of it, or can you just do it halfway down, or what?
Well, no, your fingers won't touch the bottom.
No.
No, so your fingers definitely won't touch the bottom.
At least 2/3 of the way in, then, really.
Yeah, because even with your hands, say, you know, 3 inches off the bottom of your bucket, because you're stirring from the outside, and then you stir from the outside and you get closer then in towards the middle, and then you lift your hand out. The pulsation, you can see it goes right down to the bottom of the bucket. So although your hands, you know, say that far from the bottom of your bucket, when you watch and you've taken your hand out, you can see it goes virtually down to the bottom and puts the hole right on the bottom of your bucket. So you don't have to have your hand right down there. The vortex does it itself, this pulsating movement. It's fascinating to sit for an hour watching it.
I would absolutely love to have a little course on how to do that, because I didn't realise that you went from the outside slowly into the middle and then came. So yeah, yes, please.
So that the forces, I think, are going into it, isn't it, Claire? Whereas if you do it the other way from the middle going out, your forces are sort of going outwards.
Yeah.
And I think for me there are 1 or 2 guidelines, but you have to just practice and make it your own.
Yeah.
I was taught by a bloke with broad shoulders who said you had to put as much energy as possible into it, and it was exhausting. And then I got shown by a woman who did it as a breathing exercise. So she would do it gently and then take the stick out and just be calm and then go. And she just became her own, you become your own connector with it. I think one of the things I forgot, and thanks Patricia, I forgot to actually mention you are supposed to start from the outside and work in when you stir, when you get the vortex going, rather than work in the middle and work out.
Oh.
But again, I think it's all about practicing and just finding your own rhythm with it, that becomes not a stress, and you don't try and knacker yourself up by working from your shoulder. It's a kind of whatever's comfortable, whatever works for you. It's a personal thing.
I'm really looking forward to getting into that now.
Good.
I've got a note from with what Maria Tun talks about, where she says when you've got the good spiral motion, remove the stick and allow it to reverberate before you then go back in and create chaos. Yeah. So I think, you know, it is about, isn't it, Claire? It is about this meditative effect and the connection to it and not rushing it. Like I said, the bloke who's got the big arms and can do that. It's about taking your time, enjoying it.
Yeah.
Letting it reverberate, go back in.
Excellent.
I've just spotted, thank you Patricia, that is amazing. I've just spotted Sean Cameron said we need a live stirring event, which is I like it, but I would like to have a video of somebody stirring actually, and I did have some photos, because the pictures are amazing, but that's something I think we could certainly look into as well.
Yes, we could. We could have a competition, could we not?
I've really loved everybody's feedback about what they've noticed and the experience when they're doing the preparations. And it is, I know for myself, having done it many, many times, it is an incredible, you know, I echo Claire, it's an amazing experience. And I do encourage you all to have a go. And yeah, especially finding your own rhythm, because I've been taught by probably 6 different people how to stir, and they've all told me something slightly different. And I think, yeah, tuning into what's right for you is definitely the best advice from Claire. And enjoy it, and just very briefly, we've been running some member experiments with 4 members who are using the horn manure preparation and the horn silica for the first time, and they've been coming out with some very interesting observations, which we're going to share with the gardening group and everybody too. So we'll keep this conversation going. And I think we've got another 6 webinars already booked by the looks of it. I think we're ready to draw to a close. I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Claire, for your incredible wisdom and experience.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
And everyone, just everybody who's part of the gardening club and beyond, for keeping all this so alive and interesting and full of magic. So
and if anybody isn't in the gardening club, of course, we'd love you to join. But very sincerely, thank you for zooming in.
Yeah, you're always welcome. You're always welcome.
Always, always.
And I just shout out to my Weleda sisters. Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Oh, and I'm just going to do just one final announcement. We're going to be celebrating the Biodynamic Club's 2nd birthday on the 16th of June, and you're all invited to the online party. We've got a very special guest.
Yes.
That date.
A very special guest.
And we're going to wish you all a very, very good night until the next webinar. Or
what
okay.
date?
Bye, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Good night.
Brilliant evening.
Cheers. Thank you. Patricia, did you have a question?
Well, really, it was just something to share. I think Claire mentioned earlier on that when we've done the stirrings at Weleda, I don't use the stick. I always put my arm in the. We've got a wonderful large vessel that we stir in, and I always put my arm in. And the same, you know, if I do my stirring at home in my bucket, I always just use my hand. Now, what I find for that is you really do seem to get drawn into it, because you stir with your hand and then you lift your hand up while the vortex is forming, and you let the droplets off your fingers drop back into the middle of the vortex. You take your time, and then you create the chaos and go the other way. And one thing I've noticed is that by the end, well onto it, the heat of the temperature of the water increases. Now, if you've got your hand in, you can feel that. You can feel the water gets warmer as you stir. How strange is that? I assume it's the energy created by the vortex. And also the quality of the water changes dramatically. It feels like silk. It felt like water to start off with, and it then feels like silk. So all I would say is, I know normally, you know, people say about using a stick. Do have a go with doing it with your arm and see if you notice these differences.
Yeah,
I think you will. And your intention is so fully into it because your arm's in there as well. You know, you really do become part of your intention, and you love going into it. And I just think it improves, you know, when you start to spray it around your garden. So do try it. I can recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you. That is about as good an advert as we would ever wish for, is it?
Jane's got her hand
Jane,
up.
we've got one more question from Jane, and then I think we're overrunning slightly, but it is so fascinating. So go for it, Jane.
Okay, it's just a quick one. If you had a stick, it would be going right down to the bottom of your container. do you need to put your arm in so that your finger's sort of just off the bottom of it, or can you just do it halfway down, or what?
Well, no, your fingers won't touch the bottom.
No.
No, so your fingers definitely won't touch the bottom.
So at least 2/3 of the way in, then, really.
Yeah, because even with your hands, say, you know, 3 inches off the bottom of your bucket, because you're stirring from the outside, and then you stir from the outside and you get closer then in towards the middle, and then you lift your hand out. The pulsation, you can see it goes right down to the bottom of the bucket. So although your hands, you know, say that far from the bottom of your bucket, when you watch and you've taken your hand out, you can see it goes virtually down to the bottom and puts the hole right on the bottom of your bucket. So you don't have to have your hand right down there. The vortex does it itself, this pulsating movement. It's fascinating to sit for an hour watching it.
I would absolutely love to have a little course on how to do that, because I didn't realise that you went from the outside slowly into the middle and then came. So yeah, yes, please.
So that the forces, I think, are going into it, isn't it, Claire? Whereas if you do it the other way from the middle going out, your forces are sort of going outwards.
Yeah.
And I think for me there are 1 or 2 guidelines, but you have to just practice and make it your own.
Yeah.
I was taught by a bloke with broad shoulders who said you had to put as much energy as possible into it, and it was exhausting. And then I got shown by a woman who did it as a breathing exercise. So she would do it gently and then take the stick out and just be calm and then go. And she just became her own, you become your own connector with it. I think one of the things I forgot, and thanks Patricia, I forgot to actually mention, you are supposed to start from the outside and work in when you stir, when you get the vortex going, rather than work in the middle and work out. But again, I think it's all about practicing and just finding your own rhythm with it, that becomes not a stress, and you don't try and knacker yourself up by working from your shoulder. It's a kind of whatever's comfortable, whatever works for you. It's a personal thing.
I'm really looking forward to getting into that now.
Good.
I've got a note from what Maria Tun talks about, where she says when you've got the good spiral motion, remove the stick and allow it to reverberate before you then go back in and create chaos. Yeah. So I think, you know, it is about, isn't it, Claire? It is about this meditative effect and the connection to it, and not rushing it. Like I said, the bloke who's got the big arms and can do that. It's about taking your time, enjoying it.
Yeah.
Letting it reverberate, go back in.
Excellent.
I've just spotted, thank you Patricia, that is amazing. I've just spotted Sean Cameron said we need a live stirring event, which is I like it, but I would like to have a video of somebody stirring actually, and I did have some photos, because the pictures are amazing, but that's something I think we could certainly look into as well.
Yes, we could. We could have a competition, could we not?